Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Last week, we had 3 very special guests in our studio. They came equipped with soda and snacks, essential fuel for a group of young friends. The boys are typical in a lot of ways. They're into baseball and magic tricks, and I can confirm candy. 2 are 9, the other is 11 years old. They live with their families in St. Louis County. They're all close friends. We're not going to be using their names for our conversation. Their parents are concerned, for good reason, about their future in Missouri. That's because all 3 kids are transgender boys. We'll hear from those parents later in the hour. But first, let's focus on the kids. Being trans, being boys, isn't new for them. It's been years. Their classmates call them by their chosen names, and they play on sports teams with other boys too. There's a lot in the news about gender-affirming care these days. What's less covered is what such care consists of. And for young people like the boys you'll hear from now, gender-affirming care actually begins long before puberty, long before things like surgery or hormones are even on the table. This care happens where youth spend most of their time, at home with their families, and at school and in community with their friends. It also comes from within the kids themselves, from their choices and how they make their voices heard and known. So we wanted to let you hear their stories in their own voices. To begin, I asked them to tell us about when they realized that they were a boy.
I remember that I was at my grandparents' house and my great-grandma's birthday, and I was pulling a whole fit over that I had to wear a dress.
Oh, okay. So that was not what you wanted to wear.
No, I wanted to wear one of my brother's button-downs.
And who won that particular battle? Did you get to wear the button-down, or did you have to wear the dress?
I did not win.
When did you start thinking, I'm a boy?
So my coming out was very spontaneous. Almost as soon as I had the thought, I vocalized it, and my parents let me figure it out. But I do remember, I think about a couple days to a week before I had come out, my sister wanted desperately for me and her to play like princesses or something like that. And I remember taking, I think it was like a cape or something, and insisting that I wanted to be the prince this time.
So I used the term coming out. That's a term that a lot of people do use. Does that suit you? Like, does that fit with what you feel like you have done or what you are doing?
Well, I like to call it like embracing yourself like that because that's what I tell my friends because I feel like my friends are are a safe place for me to be with, so I like to tell them everything I know that is not a secret.
That's great. And when it came to telling people other than your family, was that scary in any way? Is it something that you felt pretty ready to do?
Yeah, I was always a very vocal kid. I still am, but especially when I was younger, I would just talk about literally everything that ever happened to me. I vaguely remember that earlier in the school year, one of my friends had started going by their middle name simply because they thought it was cooler. So there was already an opening for me to go by a new name. At some point, it was just summer, and I came back with a new haircut and a new set of clothes, and I was just a different person, and no one questioned it.
Was it like that for you too, when you talked with your friends or when you were kind of going back to school after vacation?
When I went back to school, my friends were very supportive of me, and now and earlier, it hasn't really been such a big deal, and I'm really happy about that, and they have been so supportive.
It wasn't, in my case, like grown-ups not taking it as well, but it was just like trying to explain something like this to a grown-up took a little bit more thinking. You had to like put yourself in their shoes and be like, this is the best way to explain this, whereas kids were just like, whatever. Like they take most things, especially since I came out younger, like you're constantly taking in information, and you get new information and you just take it in, and it's a lot easier.
Yeah. Since you've begun introducing yourself as boys with your new names, what are one or two things maybe that have changed? And it can be changes that you feel yourself or things that you see in other people.
Yeah, I definitely found myself hanging out more with like the boys and doing more stereotypically boy things at recess, like sports and whatnot. And my friends definitely, like everyone in my class definitely treated me slightly differently. Not because of like anything that had happened, not like they had treated me bad or now they're treating me bad, but there's just like a different kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And different is not always a bad thing.
Yeah.
Now, when you came out as trans, did that change the sports you could play in or the teams you could join?
All of the teams and sports teams in my school were co-ed until 3rd grade. And so since I came out in 1st grade, that never really was a problem for me. But there was definitely that kind of like feel at recess and whatnot. Not exactly like a unspoken rule and not exactly like people wouldn't let you play. But I think more of the thing that happened to me was all of the friends that I had made who are like sort of like taking me into their groups and whatnot now that I had come out and all played sports during recess. So they were just like, come play basketball with us, come play soccer with us. So that definitely opened up a lot for me.
Like, when I was a girl and like half of kindergarten, it was like I wasn't playing a lot of sports because I didn't really get invited to a lot of sports. But now since I've transitioned, a lot of people want to play sports with me, and I have two best friends that love sports, and I play with them like every day.
Now, have there been any times when you've been worried that that adults would not believe you when you gave them, your name, told them anything about your situation?
This was less of a problem for me because my parents did a lot of like introducing me with my new name and new pronouns. After I had like my haircut and my wardrobe changed, I wouldn't come out to anyone who I just like was worried about coming out to until I like had a really good vibe of them. It was like a little bit more difficult and stressful and whatnot to come out to like everyone else, like my neighbors or the relatives I don't see a lot because I'm just like not sure I'm going to take it. I wasn't really like worried exactly, but I was like a little bit nervous that they were going to take that information and just like not do anything with it. Like they would take my new name and they would take my new pronouns, but like not the way my friends had. They would like the way like my friends would like now invite me to do like stereotypically boy things with them and like shift their friends group around to like make room for me. I was like worried that certain grown-ups just would like take my new name and pronouns and like just like treat me the exact same way, like a girl, I guess.
So like they would acknowledge it but not accept it?
Not exactly. Like they would accept my pronouns and my new name, but like not change anything else about the way they treated me. That was like my biggest concern, I think.
I've one with kids. So when I changed my name and when I went back to school, my parents forgot to, on like the school list, forgot to put my name as, like they forgot to change it. So I went to school as like on the list as my old name.
Sure.
And I didn't think kids would believe me.
What did your teacher say when you told them what your name was? what it changed to, that is.
I just told them my name and they were fine with it.
Okay,
and
that's good to
They were really
hear.
supportive.
Yeah.
I think the thing that bruised me the most when I came back to school, well, it started actually this year in 4th grade. They started making the growth and development lessons definitely more important than they were the last a different year.
The previous years.
Yes, and I was like really uncomfortable, I guess, in those moments because they don't really, at my school, they don't really do different genders. They do boy and girl genders. They don't really do what I do.
Do you all feel happier now that you're boys?
Yes,
Yes?
very much.
Okay.
I mean, think about it, like it's so weird to call myself by my old name if I have to sometimes. And when I hear my new name, I was like, was that ever actually my name?
I sometimes look back at my old name and I'm like, yeah, there's absolutely no way that was my name. Especially since like how many years it's been since I actually went by that name, and like no one calls me by that. Sometimes I'll like see it on like old passports or something like that, and I'll just like stare at it for like 30 seconds being like, whose name is this? Before I realize it's my name.
We're talking with 3 trans boys, 2 9-year-olds and an 11-year-old, about their lives and growing up in Missouri. In a lot of ways, their lives are entirely normal, but that's not how many Missouri lawmakers see them. Between bills focused on school sports and bills that seek to ban and even criminalize gender-affirming health care, the ordinary, day-to-day existence of trans young people sits squarely in the target of dozens of proposed laws. These boys may be young, but they do understand. They listen. And for years, their families have been making the journey to Jefferson City to testify against those sorts of bills and to try to convince lawmakers to see them and their families as people, as human beings, rather than political targets. Let's return to our conversation. The next voice you'll hear is the 11-year-old describing what it's like to stand up in front of a House committee and tell the adults, with no uncertainty, that they're wrong.
I've always been very outspoken. It's sort of it's sort of the same kind of feeling I assume for people who have like trouble giving class presentations, which is never me. But it hurt is the wrong word. It just feels wrong to know that the government is taking these bills that people are proposing, like the bill sponsors don't even know what the bill is about. They're like, this bill will save women's sports, and then give no explanation how, no explanation why, and they'll like misdirect the conversation, and they'll try to like pretend that they don't know what these bills are. And it's just like, it's a slightly annoying feeling to know that like there are lots and lots and lots of people here telling you that this bill is wrong, and yet you file it years and years and years over and over again.
Mm-hmm. With your parents, do you talk about these things that lawmakers want to pass?
I am not allowed to protest because my dad and mom don't want me hearing all this terrible stuff. But I go to Jefferson City and talk to senators to try to change their mind about all these bad bills. But also, I have heard some really bad things. The first time I went, there was this senator that said, like, I think trans girls should play on boys' teams and trans boys should play on girls' teams. And I really hate that they are doing that. And it like just makes me so angry. And when I was younger, like in 2nd grade, I did not understand any of this stuff. I don't think they know anything about what it's like to be trans. If if you are going to, let's say, if you're going to pass a bill or say yes or something, then actually think about what you're doing. What is it going to be like if you were trans or that person, and how is it going to harm them? Because I don't think like anyone who does that even thinks about us, the whole LGBTQ community, for a second. They don't understand, and they don't know how much it is hurting us.
I have just one more question here. So we're talking about what you've experienced in the past and how things are now. Can each of you tell me what you're looking forward to in the future?
When I think of the future, I think of being an adult and making my decisions and eating candy for breakfast every morning. But I also think of, like, if I work super hard, then I could be like whatever I want.
I'm looking forward to some point where the Missouri legislature realizes that this is hurting people. There's always going to be hate for different minorities. Any minority, anywhere, there's always going to be something. I've learned that the hard way. But if the majority of anyone there is willing to stand up, then you can make a real difference. And I'm looking forward to the point where Missouri legislature realizes exactly what these bills will do, because I'm pretty sure it'll shock them.
I'm glad to hear that there are places where you are getting support and that you are continuing to support each other. Thank you so much for joining our show today and for talking with us about things that are really personal and very touching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Those were 3 transgender boys, ages 11, 9, and 9, talking about their lives, coming out, and what it's like trying to understand why so many adults in the Missouri legislature don't accept them the way they are. And that is what we're going to take up next when we sit down with the parents of these 3 precocious kids and talk about what it's like to defend their children in the halls of power. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. No matter what's happening in Missouri's legislature, trans kids in our state now are doing what they have always been doing: growing up, going to school, spending time with friends, basically living life. Yet for their parents, there's a serious question. Can our trans children just be kids in a state like Missouri? And that's because Missouri lawmakers have spent years trying to pass laws that range from banning trans people from play in sports leagues to, more broadly, effectively removing parents and their kids' right to pursue gender-affirming care as they grow up. Parents of trans kids in our state have worked to protect and prepare their children facing this harsh reality. These moms and dads are also fighting for them. And here to talk about what that's like are 3 local parents of trans children. Maharat Rory Pickernice is the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council in St. Louis. She has spent years testifying against bills in Jefferson City. Her son is 11. Also here with us is Rabbi Daniel Bogard, father to a 9-year-old boy. And finally, we welcome the mom of another 9-year-old boy. We're going to be using only her first name, Hannah, in this discussion. Now, we heard your kids talk about their coming out stories. So, Daniel, tell us a bit about how your child expressed to you their coming out.
Yeah, by the time my son looked at us and said that he was a boy, it was like a slow-moving train that had been coming down the track for a long time. So the biggest fights that we had, that I remember, I think they're still the biggest fights, were when he would need to dress up in a dress for a formal occasion. The thing he talked about was his great-grandma's 90th birthday. But the truth of it is, there were so many moments. When he was 4 or 5 one night while I was putting him to bed, he asked me if God could make him over again in a boy's body. At almost every age, he was choosing boys' clothes and boys' toys and wanting to play with friends who were boys. So, he started asking and begging us for a boy's haircut, a short boy's haircut, and we processed our own transphobia. First, we cut his hair to his shoulders and then to his chin, and then finally gave him that short boy's haircut. And the moment we did, he looked at us and he said, "I'm a boy," and that was it.
That was it. Does that resonate in any way with you, Hannah, or with you, Rory?
Yeah. My son was 6 when he told me and his dad that he's a boy. And before a couple years leading up to him telling us, he just went really quiet. He went from being really engaged and playful and happy to being really withdrawn, looking exhausted all the time. I was sure he had some sort of illness that was causing him to be so lethargic and tired all the time. And once he told us that he's a boy, he was bouncing off the walls, couldn't wait to put on boy clothes and get his hair cut. And he had a name picked out already. And it was, just instantaneous excitement. And he just reemerged.
He was really ready then.
Yes.
Yeah. Rory, how about with you?
Our story is actually a very different story. We did not have any clue at all that this was something that was going to be coming. My son was 7 years old. He was in first grade. He had incredibly long hair, was going through a phase where he would only wear dresses, was doing ballet, very stereotypical girl things. Until we got an email one day from his teacher that he had made an announcement in the middle of the class to say that he had a new name and that he wanted to be treated like a boy. And we had a lot of conversations with him about what he meant by that and what was different about that. And it was still a slow process for us in that he didn't right away change all of his clothing. He didn't change his pronouns right away. And that was towards the end of first grade. And by the time we got to the end of the summer, we had gone through the same thing of first the shorter haircut to the shoulders, and then the fully short haircut. And then he was exclusively shopping on the boys' side of the store and just lighting up when he could put on a suit and a little fedora. And by the time he started second grade, there was no looking back.
So there are a lot of areas where parents typically don't let their kids make decisions for themselves. And this thing with clothing, right, and hair, this comes up pretty frequently. And things like, what's for dinner, when to go to bed, these things we can think of as being minor. Was there something about gender identity or the way that they were expressing themselves that made that different than those other kinds of decisions that kids might want to make on their own?
It's a hard question to fully unpack because you're watching your child discover the world for the first time, and everything is new to them and everything is an exploration. What I think became really clear to us very quickly, though, was how much gender expression was really a reflection of something much more profound, in a way that was very different from throwing a fit because we said you couldn't have macaroni and cheese for the third time in a day, let alone in a week. There was something about clothing, about how they as kids, right, how our children see themselves reflected for themselves, that becomes a matter of their very identity.
Yeah, I mean, I also, like, from the very beginning with my son, thought whether this is a phase or the beginning of a really big transition, I want all of my kids to always look back on this time and know that no matter what, their parents stand behind them. So phase or not, we're here for you while you explore yourself and the world.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
I was just going to say, I think a really important thing to understand about this is just what a not big deal thing it has been for my child and for so many kids to transition. I think a lot of folks who don't have a trans young person in their life imagine that this is huge and disastrous and comes with all of these reverberations. And the reality is this has been so easy. Being trans is one of the least interesting things about my kid. And so I think it's hard for people who haven't experienced this or see this to imagine it, but it just has not been a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that you also experienced with your son's school and the community that you are part of?
For the most part, yes. Yeah, the school has been really supportive. His teacher put us in contact with people at the district level to get his name changed on all of his paperwork. Most of the kids at school haven't thought twice about it. Most family has been supportive. But yeah, it's really not been a huge deal.
Mm-hmm. Is that also the experience that Rory, your son, has had?
Pretty much. I find with kids especially, there's so many things in the world that change rapidly around them. The idea that somebody has a new name or a new gender felt almost like we were telling them that somebody had a new hair color. It was mildly interesting, but they really wanted to go back to the show they were watching. When we made the announcement through the class list, as I said, my son started second grade with a new name and new pronouns. We heard from a lot of parents who started sharing some of their own stories. Turns out that we thought my sister was my brother growing up, or I have a nephew, or any number of stories that people shared that helped us to realize that this was a lot more common in people's experience than we might have realized. And for the most part, it really doesn't impact anybody else. And so everyone was really happy to just practice a new name, to get used to pronouns, and then to embrace our kid as the funny, spunky, active kid that he always was.
The nods around the table. So your kids are teaching you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share one really concrete example of how your son taught you about what it means to be trans?
The biggest piece that I've learned is that my son didn't change at all the day after he transitioned. He just had a new haircut and new words to describe himself. But he was very much the same kid the day before and the day after he transitioned.
I think my son had gone so inward, and the immediate reemergence, I guess, has been even still what's the most striking for me since he came out to us then versus now. And we've been getting to know him for the first time since he came out, because he had no interest. He was not engaged at all before coming out.
And that is certainly not the child I met.
No.
Last week. We're talking with 3 local parents of trans kids and what it's like to come out and grow up trans. We're speaking with Rory Pickernese, her son is 11, Daniel Bogard, father to a 9-year-old boy, and Hannah, mom to a 9-year-old boy. Now, all three of your kids are doing what's known as social transition, which involves changing their names, wearing boy clothes, and doing so very happily, and otherwise living as boys. But there are next steps with puberty not far off and things like hormones or puberty blockers. What has to happen for each of you as families before those options are even on the table?
There's a rigorous process that we would choose, I think is mandated, but I would say would be the path that our family would choose regardless of meeting with competent professionals to understand that path and to make sure that my child understands exactly what's involved in that process and that everyone feels like whatever the next steps are that we choose are the next steps that are the best for his care. And so when I say that, I'm including in that a therapist that he has been meeting with regularly since he first decided to make the transition. Therapists that his father and I meet with regularly, even before he decided to make the transition. His pediatrician has been in this conversation with us from the very beginning. Nurses and nurse practitioners, endocrinologists, there are a number of people who are involved in helping us to determine what healthcare should look like for my child, similar to any other child who has maybe a smaller team of people, but a team of people who are surrounding them, in addition to my husband, his parents, and I, my child's parents, and him, who is also very much involved in this conversation with us.
What are some of the discussions that you've had with your son so far about this?
So my son has started to ask questions about what happens to his body if what he's heard about in puberty for other people is going to be the same. What does it look like if he chooses to go on testosterone? What happens if he doesn't go on testosterone? What happens if he doesn't go on puberty blockers? So he's already started to really ask a lot of those questions. And those are some of the conversations that he's been having with us. But what's also become really clear in those conversations is his own comfort level with what he thinks his body should look like and should not look like. And so whereas at the beginning I might have said, like Hannah said, is this just a phase? Does he understand what it is? The more he starts to say things like, I don't want to grow breasts. Can we stop this? What does that mean for me? Right? The more that we're able to kind of see, okay, now this has been a few years and we can actually talk about specifics of body changes to then have him have the language to engage with medical professionals to say, what are the choices before us?
Mm-hmm. And Daniel and Hannah, your boys are younger than Rory's is. What kinds of conversations have you all had, if any, regarding gender-affirming care as your boys are growing older?
Well, my son has an older sister, and so we are talking a lot about puberty, and he's very clear and asks consistently, but that's not going to happen to me, right? The things that we're talking about that will happen to his older sister. And so we talk about the different options, and all along the way that there are choices that we can make at different points in time that will sort of take us down different roads. And he's very clear that he wants to grow a beard and have a deep voice, and, very like stereotypically male characteristics.
I'm struck in this conversation how hard it is for me to imagine these conversations absent government interference here in Missouri. That the way that our government is at war with our families and our kids is omnipresent and is in these doctors' offices and is always in these conversations. So I'm thinking about my son, who has expressed repeatedly that he doesn't want to grow breasts. But when he expresses it, he almost always says, Daddy, are Missouri Republicans going to make me grow breasts? Are they going to make me do this?
Hannah, I want to ask you about the gender clinic at Washington University, because that has been the subject of a lot of controversy and discussion. And that clinic has come under fire from Missouri lawmakers, right, and a former employee. And they accuse the clinic of pushing kids into being trans. Does that claim reflect any of what you have experienced there? And what is your reaction to such allegations?
We have had one visit, and everything that has all of the allegations against the center, I have my own personal experience with how that was not accurate at all. I took my son shortly after he came out just to get information, see what the center was like, what the possibilities were for him down the road. And this was recommended by his pediatrician when I called their office. And it was just sort of like an intake session. We were given lots of information. There was no sense of urgency. And it was, left really open-ended, like maybe we'll hear from you in a few years and maybe we won't. Mm-hmm. There were no next steps, no, down this hallway is where you go to, you're here, this is where you go now. And I left feeling really grateful for the opportunity to sit with professionals and get information and just to be able to have conversations with my son approaching puberty.
I just want to comment on this notion that I think we've all heard so many times, that being transgender is something that is forced upon a child, or that it's an agenda that we as parents have, because I find it so incredibly painful. It's painful for so many reasons, but partially because it builds on this narrative that to be transgender is a choice that people make as part of some kind of manipulation. Someone chooses to be transgender because they think they'll do better in sports. Someone chooses to be transgender because they get more attention. Whatever these ideas are, it's so insidious because it absolutely undermines this identity, but it also seeks to try to explain something that I think for a lot of people, they don't understand. And so it is the most painful thing for me as a mom that somebody would rather think that we are part of some kind of conspiracy rather than understand that we are just committed to our children living the best lives that they could possibly live, which I hope is the goal of every parent.
We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with these three parents, and we'll hear their reactions to this week's news in the state legislature and what that could mean for their futures in Missouri. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Today, we're talking with the parents of three boys, all under the age of 12, who are growing up trans in Missouri. Before the break, the parents were discussing what it's like for families to support their children's choices made over years to live as boys. But for these parents, it also means following the developments in the Missouri legislature and worrying about what lawmakers will do next to restrict their lives. Let's return to our conversation with these parents, Rory Pickernice, Daniel Bogard, and Hannah, who asked that we not use her last name. Let's talk about the Missouri legislature. For about 3 years running, the legislature has proposed bills that would ban your families from making a lot of choices you have made around your kids' transitions. And again, what has happened so far is the social transitions for them. What is it like to follow that kind of news with such personal stakes? And how do you How do you manage that news as the parents of your trans kids?
It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a parent. Quite simply, I don't have the words to describe what it is to feel so completely powerless, to know that it is your government that is trying to undermine your ability to just live your life and to support your very own child. We've made the decision to bring our son to Jefferson City. He's been an active part of testifying against these bills since I think 2019 was the first year that we brought him to Jefferson City. And so he's keenly aware of all that's involved with that. And it's hard. I think he also feels really empowered because he's learned how to find his voice and become an advocate. So many other legislators really surround him with love and support. But as a parent, the number of days that I have driven that 2-hour drive back after waking up at 4 a.m. and driving 2 hours to get there for an 8 a.m. hearing that we may or may not have a turn, and trying to then get into people's offices just to have them hear us for 2 minutes. I get back home and I have 2 other children, and we'll come home and my kids will say, "Can I show you what I did at school today? Can I tell you about what happened at recess?" And I have nothing left to offer them. Like, it takes every ounce of energy to just drive that last 10 minutes. I'll tell myself, just get home, just get home. And that's what I find to be sometimes the most painful, is what it has taken away from me in supporting my family and my kids all the time that I'm not watching a TV show or playing a game, because all I can do is just melt on the couch from sheer exhaustion.
And Daniel and Hannah, for you, both of you too are parents of more than one child. I mean, what kinds of resources does it take to be a parent to your trans child and their siblings, and like to hold it together?
I'm exhausted. And I'm not exhausted from having a trans kid, because that has been a blessing and truthfully relatively easy. I'm exhausted from this sense that my government is at war with my family. And right, it's what Rory said. We drive over and over and over again to beg them to just leave us alone. I've started having panic attacks at night before I go to Jeff City, and it just becomes so all-consuming. I'm a 5th-generation Missourian. My kids are the 4th generation to live in our home that my grandpa built, that I grew up in, that my dad grew up in. And we are up at night having conversations about what is the red line, and when do we flee, and where is far enough, and will Illinois be safe enough if these people once again take over control of our federal government? And it's terrifying. And it feels like a rabbit hole, except it keeps coming true.
Mm-hmm. Now, we should note that we're talking on Tuesday, and earlier today, the Missouri Senate gave initial approval to legislation that would bar transgender children from accessing gender-affirming health care, and a second bill approved would prohibit transgender school athletes from participating in sports that align with their gender identity. Senate Democrats filibustered for over 12 hours, but they could not stop those bills from advancing. So today, Tuesday, this is a tough day for parents like yourselves. Hannah, is there a point at which discussion of leaving Missouri becomes more than hypothetical, and to the point that that Daniel was making? Has that conversation been one that you've been having with more frequency or with a different sort of tone?
Yes. Yeah. And some of those conversations are sort of spearheaded by my 11-year-old, my son's older sister, feeling like if Missouri isn't safe for her brother, it isn't safe for any of us. and she wouldn't want to live here, even if, their parents decided that we're staying in Missouri. The tone has changed for sure.
Mm-hmm. Is there a point for you, Rory, and your family where you've talked about that, leaving Missouri?
We've absolutely had that conversation. Our number one priority, and I think our number one responsibility, is to our children and to keep our children safe. And it's so wild for me to wrap my head around, because we really have this great life in St. Louis, except for the fact that the state government is making life unsafe for our family. And there's no way that we are going to risk our child if we think that life is untenable for him.
What does the state of Missouri have to lose if they lose your children?
Our kids are honestly the coolest 3 kids that I know. I think you should give them their own talk show after that interview. You're talking about when you meet a child who is trans or a child who's non-binary, you're meeting somebody who has more self-awareness than most adults that I get to meet. And what I find comes through, and I see it in our children and I see it in so many other children that I encounter, is an empathy, a kindness, an openness, a curiosity, a creativity. And that can translate into endless possibilities.
Yeah, I know my son mentioned in the interview that he feels like he's been an inspiration to some of his peers at school in finding themselves and maybe sharing that information with family or friends. And, like Rory said, that can lead to that leadership quality can lead to a lot of things as he grows up. And Missouri does stand to lose a lot of, really self-empowered, self-aware youth.
It's not just that Missouri would lose our kids, but it's that my kid would lose his home, and that we would lose our home and our community and being their family. And look, our government is trying to make being trans so difficult that it's impossible to be trans in public. That's what all of these laws add up to when you look at their totality. And we're talking about children and families fleeing their home because our state government is telling them that they're not welcome here. Being trans isn't an ethnicity, but at some point the conversation is not, is this ethnic cleansing, but where in the process of ethnic cleansing are we? And it's so unreal, it's so surreal that this is our life, and this is our state, and this is our home, and yet it is.
Last question here. What gives you hope or fuels you in moments like this?
We spend a lot of time talking about the voices of hate that we encounter, and part of that is because those are very powerful voices in our state and across our country right now. But the voices of love and support are actually so much more expansive. And that's what keeps carrying me forward. I have just felt our family surrounded with love. I mentioned earlier, I hate going to the Capitol most days because it's been so hard and painful. But my son loves it because when he goes, he's a hero to some of the people there. They celebrate him. They pull him into their office. They give him snacks. There are way more voices of love and affirmation, and I know that those voices are going to win out. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I know that those voices are going to win.
Maharat Rory Pickernice is the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of St. Louis. Her son is 11 years old, and in his spare time, he's learning tricks on his unicycle. Hannah, your son, loves baseball, is 9 years old, came in with a great deal of energy. Daniel Bogard serves as a rabbi at the Central Reform Congregation. His son is also 9 years old, and what I learned about him is that he only likes some flavors of Starburst. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our production intern is Avery Rogers. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Our podcast proudly supports St. Louis artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.